So as my topic suggests, we will be looking, as they introduced, we will be looking at the communalism, the current condition in India with communalism and how it's directed towards the heritage sites. I would like to acknowledge my work because this work was done as a fulfillment of a module under Professor Iacono, and I would like to present my gratitude to him and also my gratitude to Speaking Archaeologically and my mentor, Ms. Shriya Gautam, for her guidance throughout the whole set of project. Now to introduce this presentation, we see that colonialism and the whole colonial ideology percolated in the Indian thought process, and much has to do with the history writing of the Indian history writing, and it sort of developed on how one perceives the Indian heritage. Here we will study the communal perceptions often directed towards heritage, specifically of Islamic descent. We will trace the dispute of the Babri Mosque and how the role of archaeology took place, and then we will question the protection of the heritage sites, specifically in the context of Babri Mosque, and protection of sites also in the context of Islamic descent. Also, we will compare the protection towards of Babri Mosque with the protection of Quwwatul Islam Mosque, which is protected heritage site. So the methodology which I used for this whole presentation or paper per se is in the form of secondary sources. So it's more or less a review and the critique of Babri Mosque and its failed protection. And therefore, most of the sources, I have relied for most of the sources from the reports and secondary work, which has already been done critiquing the mosque demolition. Now to discuss about the communalism in India and the history, we see that communalism in India can be traced back to the 19th century, and it can be said that the thought process, as I said before, was disseminated in the historical writing of India, where the Indian society is seen in the context of being divided into groups of economic, social, and religious sects. Of course, much was also to do with the divide and rule policy of the colonial government, which was much largely at play here in a more political sense, basically to prevent the mobilization of the Hindu and Muslim communities. The policy did work, however, and there were already internal political constraints between these groups. Post-independence, we see communalism between these religious groups of Hindus and Muslims started being largely directed towards the heritage sites. And the notion here is often picked up that the Islamic invaders destroyed the Hindu temples and built their respective mosques or other structures. However, in the current study of the intention behind the destruction of the temples and the buildings of the mosques, political intention is often noted. In the pre-Islamic India, the temples had a religio-political agency, and destroying them is noted to be in regards to the political suppression. It also needs to be noted that destroying the temple was not at all a new concept, which was brought in by the Muslim invaders and was very much present during the time, during the pre-Islamic India. And though it's little in number, we see that there were contentions between kingdoms following the Hindu religions, and temples did get destroyed during that point of time. Nevertheless, in the present time, the whole ideology of Islamic desecration of Hindu temples is now being used as a political tool to be in power of our elections, and such can be seen from the case of the Babri Mosque. Now, the timeline of the Babri Mosque is in brief. The Babri Mosque was built in the 16th century by Mir Baqi under the order of the first Mughal ruler, Emperor Babur, and the site is located in Ayodhya, Uttar Pradesh. But the tensions directed towards the mosque can be noted from 1853 to 1856. It was the first time when the tensions were noted, and mostly it was due to distortion of historical facts. in accordance to, like, for instance, Baburnama, the autobiography of Babur, was faulty in the translation of Leiden in 1813. And further, the claims which were made during the people at that point of time weren't rectified and were recorded as it is. Later, the contentions grew even more under the colonial government, where the mosque was divided into two parts, where Muslims could worship their own end, and Hindus could worship for their own purposes. Later, an appeal was given to the government to build a temple in an outer court where it was divided for the Hindus. And later, after the partition and after the post-independence, basically, the religious contentions grew even more when an idol was placed inside the mosque. Later, we see a lot of religio-political organizations such as VHP, as it is written here, or BJP. They got involved, and basically the mosque issue was taken up as a political chant, especially for BJP, as we see. And soon after this, like, the elections was won, and we see after the elections on 6th December 1992, the mosque was unfortunately demolished. In this whole process, we see what exactly was the role of archaeology in this whole contention. So soon after the demolitions, the World Archaeological Conference was held in Delhi to discuss the demolition of the heritage site, but the discussion was unfortunately banned by the extremist religious group of archaeologists. Later on, we also see that different archaeological reports were generated regarding what is below the mosque. And when the site was first excavated in 1970s by archaeologist B. Bilal, in his work of 1980, he noted that the site was devoid of any special interest in context to the whole conflict. Later in 1990s, again, based on the current excavations of 1970s, the statement was changed. Again, an excavation was taken in 2003, where the witnesses of the excavations noted that the excavation took already from a preconceived notion that they do need to find a temple underneath, while the anomalies, they note that the anomalies which were found are actually brick bats, and on which the floors are supposed to be laid on, and not exactly pillar bases as the 2003 excavations suggest. However, it is to be noted that excavations and the report generated were very much contested, and these reports did somewhere lead to the belief that the temple did existed during some point of time. But what is missing in this whole archaeological contention is role of archaeology, which is also to protect and preserve a heritage site and not just to excavate. We'll see. So was Babri Mosque actually worthy to be protected? In accordance to the law of Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act, soon after the independence, which was developed in 1958, we see that any site which is 100 years or more in existence need to be protected under the law. Of course, in the context of Babri Mosque, in accordance to this law, the site would have been protected, but the politics came into the play and the site was not protected. This also raises the questions if the site would have been demolished if protected. For this, we can take example of the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, which was built in 12th century, and the mosque currently faces the same sort of contentions, the same communal feelings directed towards them. Of course, it's based on the fact that 27 Hindu and Jain temples were destroyed to build a mosque, which also reuses its sculpted pillars. The whole contention in regards to the Quwwatul Islam Mosque started on November 2000. And we see currently there's a lot of debate even amongst the archaeologists in context of changing the site's name, like in context of changing Qutub Minar's name, regardless of archaeological or historical sources, what they suggest us. In context of this, we see that the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, which is situated in the Qutub Minar complex, is already protected and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which did diverge a lot of communal sentiments directed towards the site. So Per se, Babri Mosque could have been protected if Babri Mosque would not have been demolished, if it would have been protected. And we see that it's also like collective public responsibility and moral obligation of the public to also to protect the archaeological site. As I said before, yes, possibly yes, the Babri Mosque would have not been demolished if protected. And there was a survey done in 1993, which said that the communities, like over 34% of Hindu respondents were in support of the mosque demolition, while 94% of Muslim respondents said that they were not in support. However, it needs to be noted that a heritage site, it's not just a building. Of course, it has heritage values in accordance to Burra Charter, and more or less the heritage value which was taken in context of this heritage site was spiritual, and mostly the religious value was relied on. While we need to remember that it is important to strike a balance between various heritage values in context of understanding what actually heritage means to us as a community. Of course, what was missing and what can be done in the future is obviously reorganizing and introducing new rules and regulations against the communal outbreak, which still haven't, is still not in the, is still not a law in India. Communal rules and regulations against communal outbreak towards the heritage sites. Of course, we need to have a checks and balances, and archaeological organizations need to take steps more proactively. Heritage awareness is another important concept which can help us fight towards the communal thought process. Of course, there are public outreach programs which are being taken place in India, and even though most of them are in academia, these programs and the heritage awareness has helped a lot in these past few years of enriching minds of the young generation in India. So to conclude, we saw how the notion of restoring the past by destructing the present heritage and building new worship places is by and large in function in India right now. And we see how the dispute weighed more than the heritage site being a heritage site. We saw the example of Communal Islam Mosque, and how if the Babri Mosque would have been protected, it possibly would not have been demolished. And we saw how there needs to be regulations to keep the role of archaeology and archaeological organizations in check, sort of like a check and balance procedure. And yes, of course, change starts from the ground level, where the communal narrative of ours and theirs can be changed and need to be changed through public outreach programs. Thank you.